what we're going to do now is just set up something called Git for our project. And so most likely you guys have not used Git before, and it's very different paradigm from things that you've probably used in the past. But it's super useful, and as I mentioned before, it's really essential for developers to at least kind of understand the basics of it. So I'm going to put a link to the Git source page, uh, just so you guys can see, have that there. So I'll put that in the chat. And so Git is just Git. It's a software that does version control. And what that means is basically when you're making a project, um, I'm sure that you guys have had the experience of like building a project and or like even just writing a paper. You might have like your first draft of the paper and you might call that like, English paper version one. And then you might at some point decide, I've taken it this far and I want to make some changes, but I don't want to lose the first paper that I wrote. I want to like add this section, but if I end up not liking that section, I want to be able to go back to the other paper. And so normally what you would do, just using a file system, is you'd make a copy of the original paper, and then you'd have my English paper, version two. And so you make some changes in here and you say like, oh, I'm happy with this, I'm going to keep going. Or you'd say, this didn't really work out, I'm going to go back to version one. And you might keep doing that. So then you have like multiple versions. And then, depending on how good you are at file management, you may end up in a place where you have like, version 25 final edit, and you might have another one that's like, actually, this is the final one. And so that's fine. That's how like a lot of people keep track of their changes to things. But most programmers and developers use other tools to do essentially the same thing in a way that's kind of like hidden on the computer. So that way we can just see our code and not see like a million files called like version one, version two. Because we tend to be programmers tend to be we have to deal with a lot of different files and a lot of different systems and different setups, and so we want to have a robust system for dealing with that. That's basically what Git does, is it keeps track of your versions of different things. um, so I'm going to go over some of the basic commands. We're not going to use it like a crazy amount, but we're just going to get it set up, and so that we can use it. And I'll introduce new things that we can do throughout the semester. And so to use Git, another thing that makes Git a little bit hard to use at first is that you have to use the terminal. It's something that you only really use with the command line or terminal. So you use text-based commands and you get text-based feedback. So that's different if you're used to using software with an interface where you click on buttons and you see the result. Using a text-based interface can be a little bit confusing at first, but it's really useful for developers. I'm not really gonna like, this isn't like what your grade for this class is based on. So if you think Git sucks and you hate it, like that doesn't mean that you can't write code. But if you want to be a developer and you want to be a programmer, it's a really important tool to know. So it's not really like your grade is not going to require that you're an expert in Git, but it is something that I'll be talking about just in the normal sort of like process of creating coding projects. So let's actually do it. So let's go back to our project and let's open up the terminal and let's go through some basic commands. So when you see the terminal, it says, "Welcome to the Glitch console." It says if you're following someone else's instructions, make sure you trust them. That's kind of funny because you can really screw a lot of things up in the terminal if you don't know what you're doing. So somebody could kind of trick you into doing stuff that you don't want to do. I'm not going to do anything like that. For now, the console and the editor don't automatically sync. You can manually run the refresh command and it will force a refresh, updating the editor with any console created files. Okay, so we're not really going to be creating files, so we don't need to worry about that. For more information, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so then it shows us where we are. So this thing here that says app at MMP 310 3JS demo, that just kind of shows that's the website we're on. And this little dollar sign is like where we add commands, and then there's a little cursor here where I can type. Um, and so the first command I'm going to type is clear. That just like clears everything in the terminal. So I have the whole window to add new commands. So clear just does what it sounds like. It just does clear. Another basic command that you will want to use is pwd. This tells you where you are. It just shows us that we're inside of the app folder. And another command, I'll make a cheat sheet of these commands later, but another command you want to use is ls. That lists all the files in your directory. So you can see, it's the same thing as what we see in the interface. The README, to do, index, script, and style are all right there. And if I type in ls, it just shows me what's there. And I don't have any other folders right now, so I can't move anywhere else. So we don't have to worry about that for right now. We'll do that later. There are modifiers to the command. So if I do like ls-a, that means all. And so that actually shows me this little thing right here, which is what we're going to talk about in a second, which is the .git. And so you can see when I do ls-a here, there's actually more stuff in here than what it originally showed me. And so what the computer does is it knows that there's some files that I don't really use visually. I only use them in the terminal. And so it hides them from the file system if we're looking at it in a visual interface, like our file system right here. But we can create those files and we can look at them. And so if we want to make a file that's hidden from the visual interface, we just put a little dot in front of it. And so there's one special file that has a dot that we can see, which is the .git ignore. And there's nothing in there right now. We'll maybe add some stuff later, but that's just a file that tells Git to ignore certain things. Okay, so we see that there's .git in there. There's some other stuff in here that we're going to ignore. So those are some basic commands. I'm going to clear again. And now I'm going to use some git commands. So when I make a command in Git, I always start just with the word git, G-I-T. And then there's a bunch of different commands. The first one I'm going to use is git init. That's going to initialize my GitHub repo or my Git repo. So I'm going to hit enter and it says it reinitialized this repo. So I only need to use that once, and it had actually already done it for me. So I don't really even need to do that, but the majority of the time when you're creating a new software project, that's what you're going to do first. So the next thing I'm going to do, and this is the thing that I'm going to do a ton, is I'm going to say git status. So this doesn't actually do or change anything, but it just tells me what's happening. And so it's just going to give me some feedback about what's going on with my project. So it says I'm on branch master, nothing to commit, working directory clean. So that means that there's no changes to my project that I can change. So the next thing I'm going to do is say git log. This will tell me all of the commits that have been made on my project in the past. And you can see that Glitch has actually already made a bunch of commits for me. So when I first made the project, it made this like README. And let's see. Okay, so it actually did all of this different stuff. Wow, there's a lot of commits in here. Okay, this is making the license. This is making the files. Okay, so there's like a lot of commits in here. This is kind of nuts. So that's everything it did to get my project set up. It imported all of these different assets and files and stuff like that. And the thing that's cool about Git is there's this history of all of that stuff that I can look through if I want to know, when something happened or why it happened or other things like that. So we are going to make our own commit, but first we have to make some changes. We can't commit just like nothing. And so what I'm going to do is leave the terminal for a second. I'm going to go to my script file and I'm going to delete all of this JavaScript. I'm just going to hit Command A and hit backspace. I'm going to delete all of this JavaScript, and I'm just going to start out with a very simple JavaScript program. I'm going to increase the size a little bit again. I'm going to say console.log hello world. And I'm going to save that. And if we preview this, I'm going to go to my preview window. This doesn't actually change the website at all, but if I open up my console, there's hello world from my script. So that's our first line of our little program. And we'll go over this in a second. This may look familiar to some of you guys if you've taken MMP 210. Or you might not remember it, so we'll go over it in a second. Also, real quick, if you don't know what I just did there, that was opening up the JavaScript console. That's another thing that you should be familiar with at this point, but if not, that's fine. The way I'm on Chrome on a Windows, so the way I open the JavaScript console is Control Shift and J, and there's my little console. I can also get there by right-clicking and go to Inspect. And this is open on the Elements tab, but if I click on this little arrow, I can go to the console. And there's our script, script.js line 1, hello world. And yeah, if you're on a Mac, you do like Command Alt J to open the console. If you're on like not Chrome, it's probably something else, but I don't remember right now, but I'm sure you can Google it. Anyway, so now that we've made a change to our script, you're going to see when we go back to our terminal and I do git status, now something has changed. So git tells me something new. And it basically just says the script is different. So we can see right here, anything that's red is a change that I've made. So in this case, I've modified a script, script.js, and so it knows that something's changed, but I haven't committed to that change yet. And so what commit means for Git is that I'm saying this is this is something that I want you to remember that I did because I may move on in the future. But for right now, I want you to remember this part. So I don't have to commit every single line of code I write. There's a lot of code that I'm going to write that I don't want to save. But if I do want to save something, then I want to commit it using Git. And essentially what Git is like a series of changes. So we say, okay, I made this change, I added something, I definitely want to keep it, so I'm going to commit this change, and Git remembers, and then we just keep going. We keep adding to it. We're probably not going to do a lot of crazy stuff with Git. There's tons of really wild stuff that you can do with it, but we're probably just going to like keep things very simple for this semester. But anyway, if I want to add this change, if I want to make a commit, I first need to say git add, and then I have to add the thing. So in this case, it's script.js. So I say git add script.js, I hit enter. Now it doesn't look like anything happened because it's a text-based interface. So if I want to see that worked, I have to type in git status again and hit enter again. And now it's green. So that means it knows that I want to commit this script, but the commit hasn't happened yet. There's two parts that have to happen. So I have to add the things that I want to commit because you don't necessarily always want to add all of your changes. You might have changed some CSS over here, some JavaScript over here, and you just want to commit the JavaScript. So it gives you that extra step to say, I just want to commit the JavaScript, ignore the other stuff that I did for now. So now I'm ready to make a commit. I'm going to say git commit. And for a commit, I have to add a message. So that's what this -m means. That means what's coming next is a message. If I just do git commit, it's going to get annoyed at me and make me write a message in a really gross program called Vim that I want to avoid. So I always want to have a -m there. And then I have a quotation mark to start the message to say this is the commit. And I'm going to say updates script, update script.js. I didn't really do much here. Usually you want to have a message that like explains what the point of this change in your code was. But that's a pretty simple change. I'm just going to hit enter. And then if I do git status again, I get this on branch master, nothing to commit, working directory clean. I'm not going to talk about other stuff related to the terminal quite yet today, but those are a few basic commands, and I'll write those out in the notes for the video. So yeah, those are kind of like the only basic commands that you need to know really to get started. We'll go over other ones in later classes. Okay, so let's take a little break because that was probably a lot of information. I'm gonna X out of here, and I'm gonna subtract or minus this a little bit. So let's take a break for a few minutes. I'm going to stop recording, um,